Our guest today is known originally in the 80s and 90s as a playwright. Don has since gone into filmmaking, producing, and screenwriting. Since 2000, Don has produced, co-produced, or co-funded over 25 feature films through his production company, nextPix. These films include the Sundance award-winning documentary Tibetan Song, 2009, Hal Hartley's Ned Rifle, 2014, as well as internationally acclaimed films Railway Children in 2016. Don has also been a producer on films that have premiered and won awards at Sundance, Toronto, Cannes, Berlin, and the numerous other film festivals. Today, Don, I believe you're going to be talking us through what it's like to produce independent films, specifically ones that are meaningful and champion social change. So thanks for joining us, Don.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. I've been working with Trevor for the past few months, and it's been really a pleasure. And so I did say thank you to Trevor today, and I'll say thank you again. It's been a good run, Trevor. So good luck on your
of course. Thank you, Don. It was great working with you.
Absolutely.
So
okay,
Don,
so where do you want to start? Sam?
Yeah, sure. So can you just briefly describe your background and kind of how you got into the independent producing field, as well as what independent film producers actually do?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, I guess you could actually blame my parents because my mom was a movie buff. So when we were teenagers, she would drag us willingly to see a lot of movies. And so I really sort of fell in love with film, at a very early age. And so I wanted to go to film school eventually. And I had really had my eyes on UCLA Film School, and I would drive up to Los Angeles and check out the campus and really fell in love with it. But I didn't really have the grades as in high school. So I had to go to junior college. I went to Santa Ana College and spent the first 3 years, 2 or 3 years at Santa Ana College, got my grades up. Then I transferred over to UCLA Film School, which was sort of a leap because it was a hard film school to get into. So I was, I think I had some talent, I guess that's what they thought. So I got into UCLA Film School as an undergraduate, then went on to graduate school in film theory and criticism. So undergrad is production, and graduate school as in film criticism and theory. And that experience in my master's program really exposed me to a lot of different types of films that were not American. They were, I really got exposed to a lot of European films and a lot of different world cinema, really. And that's really what I think sparked my interest in really getting involved in world cinema. You might say films that have a social impact, or that's one way to put it, because a lot of the films that I love have had a social impact of some kind. But regardless, that was really sort of the evolution. I ended up going to UCLA Film School, but then I drifted away and into another career for quite a few years, actually, and came back to start a production company with my partner, wife, Diana, in 2000, and we started nextPix. And really, my film Clouds was the initial foray into independent film producing. That's really what we used as a vehicle to start nextPix, my film Clouds, which was very influenced by European filmmakers, black and white, art film, et cetera, et cetera. After Clouds, I continued to develop myself as a screenwriter and a producer, and have played a lot of different roles with a lot of different projects. And that gets into a little bit, well, what does an independent film producer do? It really depends on their role. And I've done everything from being an executive producer to a co-producer to an associate producer to a producer. And they each has a little bit of a different, they have a different role, and they have a different impact on the production because of that role. So I could get into detail of each one, but I don't want to waste too much time on that. I think a lot of you already know what those roles are. But suffice to say that being a producer, when you're the producer, you're really responsible for the project from front to back. And, so you really have to take on responsibility for making it happen. And whether that's being a producer or a producer writer or a producer writer director, the producer is really the main person. And I think that's sort of misunderstanding sometimes, because people do tend to think, because of auteur theory and auteur film, theory, people think that, well, the director is the key person. Well, I would differ. I would say that the producer is really the key person. Even the director who has to become a producer is really the producer. So did we cover it, Sam, or do we?
No, absolutely. So,
Okay, great.
started life outside UCLA, then went there to the film school,
Yes.
where you kind of discovered the world cinema influence that drove you to create Clouds under nextPix,
Yes.
which had quite a lot of European influence. And in that, you've had these many hats, from the exec to co-producer to associate producer. And one thing I will say for anyone who's kind of listening and wants to ask a question, please put it in the chat. And we will come to your questions later. So if you do want to know more about the exec producer, co-producer, associate producer, maybe pop that in the chat and we can always get around to it later. But one thing I would say is, a lot of us are new to this, so it'd be interesting to understand the process of getting an independent film funded, made, and distributed. So could you just take us through a little bit about, so you've got a project, how do you go through from funding to distribution?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one thing, and I'm going to pop up some notes here. One thing that I would say to keep in mind is that, from my perspective, what I've seen is that it really depends on the tier of budget that you're looking at, that you need to fund in order that will change your funding strategy for the, generally speaking. So if you're looking to fund a very low budget, micro budget, under $50,000 film, that's one thing. If you're looking to film something under 500,000, that's another thing. If you're looking for $1 million of budget, that's something else. And then you move up. And so really your strategy will change and shift depending on the level of budget. So I just took a few notes in terms of what I've seen in terms of the budget levels and what it can mean. So under 50K, under 500K, the ultra low or low budget, obviously you're going to have friends and family involved. You might have to crack out the credit card to get something, at least part of it done, or at least to get started. You also have crowdfunding, which you can do. I don't do as much crowdfunding as I used to. I used to be involved with more crowdfunding, now less so. But crowdfunding is still a viable way to get a project going through Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever. Crowdfunding can be, particularly again in the lower budget arena, very, very useful. The thing about crowdfunding that I really want to stress is you have to do it correctly. You just can't put your crowdfunding page up and expect people to come in droves. It needs to be staged. It needs to be advertised. It needs to be, the word has to get out. I've seen, I don't think it happens as much now because I think people are more savvy, but I certainly used to see where people would just put up a crowdfunding page and say, oh, they're just going to come and donate or give to the project. And it really doesn't happen that way. So that's just a note there to be very careful about. Grants, of course. Trevor put together a great list of grants for nextPix, which I've been using for a couple of the projects that I'm working with now.
That's actually, sorry to interrupt, Don. I just wanted to let everyone know that's actually on the Young Entertainment Professionals website as well. So if you want to check that out, Don was nice enough to let us publicly publish it so that everyone can also take advantage of those grants.
Okay, yeah, that's excellent. So yeah, I mean, it's been very useful to me. Obviously, that's why we wanted to do it as well for a couple of projects I'm working on. And then you have something called fiscal sponsorship, which is, I don't know, a fiscal sponsor is really a way for a very low budget film without having to set up a business entity to run in an investor, business plan with the investor, all the legal requirements of having investors. Fiscal sponsorship, like the Independent Future Project or Fractured Atlas, you can have people donate to your film through the fiscal sponsor and take a tax write-off. And they can tag it for your project. And that's a very good thing to look into as well. So you can cobble together a budget using family and friends, crowdfunding, grants, and fiscal sponsorship at that lower budget level. When you move up to, let's say, around $1 million or above, then you start potentially looking at investors, and that involves developing a business plan and having really an approach that could, for example, involve a sales agent at that works with you at a film market. A sales agent, by the way, for those not familiar with that type of company, is they basically work with you they can work with you on the front end to package your film with actors, directors, and director and so on, so that it becomes attractive to a distributor, and they can pre-sell your film, the territory rights for that film in various territories. And then you can take those pre-sale agreements and take them to a financier, and those become bankable commodities to that financier. If the sales agent is credible, and if they can, if they have some kind of credibility within the market. Now, just not any sales agent can do that, but the more credible ones can. They can develop what's called a minimum guarantee and sales forecast, and those can be used to go to a financier and back your project. So sales agents, because there's competition now, you don't have to use a sales agent. There's online platforms where you can go directly to distributors yourself. In theory, you can do that. That is a trend that's happening. But for the most part, it's still the more traditional way of working with a sales agent, going to film markets such as the European film market in Berlin, or the American film market in Los Angeles, or the film market, the Marche de Film at Cannes in France. And those are different film markets you can go to. And I have a discussion, by the way, about some of those film markets and some of these topics on the YouTube talks that Trevor and I put up on the YouTube channel for nextPix. So if you want to hear more about that, you can go to the YouTube and listen to those talks. The next tier would be the studio level, what I would call a studio level or major production house. Now, a lot of people are interested in this because it's really, you as a creative, you're just writing the screenplay, you're just creating a pitch deck, probably, that would be a requirement, to go to a major production house or a studio with your project, generally speaking, through a representative of some kind. At this level, you need to have a rep, you need to have an agent, you need to have a manager or a lawyer that will submit for you to that level of company. So I've worked with all of these tiers in terms of going for funding, from the crowdfunding level on up to now. Right now, we have projects that are at the studio level being put, major projects being put in front of studios as well, and major production houses. Or if you're looking to attach talent, your rep, your lawyer, your manager, whatever, could take your project to an A-list actor, try to get them interested and involved as a producer, because sometimes A-list actors, talent, or a director will be involved or want to get involved with a good script. And that, of course, makes your proposition to a studio much more compelling if you have, major talent attached to it. One last bit I wanted to mention, always to consider in terms of film funding, is the tax write-off situation, because oftentimes films, even at the lower level, low budget, can be a viable tax write-off for the person putting money into your project. I mentioned fiscal sponsorship. That's one way to do that. But if you get into an investor level, the investor can also potentially take a tax write-off as well. But the advantage as an investor is if the film makes money, well, they can make money off of the project. And so that's the incentive for the investor, but they can have a tax write-off advantage as well. And these tax incentives and tax credits and these tax incentives vary from state to state, and some states don't have anything. Some states have very beneficial tax situations for film investment. So that's a little bit about funding scenarios that I would go through, that I've seen in terms of getting a film funded. So now, once you've got the film funded, then you need to get the film distributed. So sometimes I've been involved with projects where I come on actually at the tail end, believe it or not. I'm not actually involved in the beginning necessarily. I come in towards the end of it to help find distribution. So that again can involve going to a film market and seeking distribution for your project at a film market, which I've done. And we've gone to film markets with documentary films and gotten distribution. And it's so, you can work as an executive producer or co-producer, depending on the relationship you have with the producer, and you can help them to find distribution. Or of course, as a producer, if you're the main driving force, again, the producer has to take responsibility to find distribution for their project. So distribution scenarios, just like funding scenarios, can there's different levels. So I mean, everybody knows now you can distribute anything anywhere on a digital platform. I mean, YouTube, of course, we all know that. It doesn't cost anything, but the question is anybody going to take a look at it? Well, that's a whole different question, right? But really, there are very few barriers to entry in terms of getting your film distributed on a digital platform. And of course, a lot of people with short films have done that. So, but if you move into higher budget films, you're looking to do a theatrical release, of course, and possibly a streaming. And the streamers are really sort of disrupting the entire shape of the industry. In some ways, they're really disrupting it because they can become a one-stop shop. I mean, they can basically, distribute your film, and that's it. They can just take it and distribute it. And so it sort of cuts out all the other territory scenarios that I was talking about in terms of distribution of your film. It doesn't have to, and oftentimes it won't, but it does have that potential to be very disruptive. And the whole online environment, again, including really situations where you can seek a distributor through an online platform, and really you don't need a sales agent per se. Again, it's not really having as much of an impact as people feared or thought it might, but it is something that can happen. So then, obviously the dream is to go wide theatrically. Everybody wants to do that. And also to go to, in terms of, you have to talk about festivals in terms of distribution, particularly for independent filmmakers. Festivals, a lot of times that will be your way of getting your film distributed realistically. I mean, of course, again, you can distribute online, you can distribute through a digital platform of some kind, but film festivals are a wonderful way to gain awards, get recognition, get your portfolio set up and go from there. Okay, so did I go over that one?
Absolutely.
Okay,
definitely
great.
Covered a lot, and
Yeah,
probably created quite.
Hopefully not too quickly. I mean, I can take in the Q&A. We can get into more if you want.
Yeah, and I suppose there's one question that I just had. Well, there's so many questions. I was writing like a madman. But essentially, one thing I would say is it seems. So there's the kind of the micro budget stuff, which is kind of crowdfunding. And then if you want to kind of go above that, you need representation, right? Which it would either be in the form of a sales agent, an agent, manager, or lawyer. If we focus on the sales agents, how would you meet those people though? Because a lot of people here are kind of newer to the game as such.
Yeah, I mean, I worked through, there are a couple of different ways. One, you get a referral. So someone that's worked, let's say you just happen to work as a co-producer with a director that has a relationship with a good sales agent. Well, you can get a referral. That would be one way. Another way I've done it is at the film markets themselves. You go to the film market and you try to set up meetings with the sales agents. The issue there is that they're so busy trying to sell films that sometimes it's hard to get a meeting with the sales agent at a film market. So you have to maybe just do some kind of preliminary introduction, and then later on you can follow up with them. But then, and also later in the market, maybe early in the market, they're really busy, but later in the market, their time might free up and you can speak to them directly and meet with them and talk to them about your project. That's sort of how I've done it. Yeah.
Got it. So can you talk about what it means to succeed in the independent film market world and what it takes for a film to be successful in your mind?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that success is really, to me, is something that you need to define for yourself. I mean, I'm a little bit of an outlier. I think that that the way that I've been able to succeed, if I'm going to be honest, is not to necessarily depend on the projects to be blockbusters. I mean, you can look at my IMDb if you have IMDb Pro, and you can see that the films I'm associated with have not necessarily made a lot of money. It's not that always it's listed necessarily, but when you compare it to a studio resume, well, there's no comparison. So what makes me feel good about what we've done is the fact that they have had some level of social impact. They have good messaging, the films, and they've won awards and they've been successful that way. But realistically, in order to support that, oftentimes it involves doing some kind of a side gig or side work to make that happen. Sometimes those films can be the source of revenue. It isn't always that they're money losers necessarily. But I think that if you're going to be doing films that have social impact or have, some kind of, artistic bent to them, unless you approach it very intelligently in a certain way to sort of make it a hybrid of a genre and an art film, which often happens with the more successful directors, Jordan Peele being a good example of a recent one, Quentin Tarantino, obviously another one. So at any rate, if you can look at success in terms of you feel good about it, it makes you happy, and you're able to figure out some business model for your company. By the way, I would advise, forming a company. That's a good thing. That's a good first step. Of course, do it intelligently and do it properly. But forming a company, a production company of your own, could be a good first step for you. But anyway, to define success for yourself, what it means for you, what is it that you can get up in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror and say, I feel good about what I did. I think that's the bottom line for me. And I literally have talked to people who told me that in their IMDb that there were very few of the films that they actually liked. This is the truth.
Wow.
So, for me, success means feeling good about it. You can, and you may be a genre film director and be able to do the most commercial genre films and have a passion for it and love it. And that's what you love, do it. That's it. It isn't that you have to do socially relevant films and all that stuff, that's Don, because that's my thing. But your thing may be completely different and you might have a passion for it and go for it. That's what I would say.
So building upon your kind of like passions, and I'm sure a few people in this group have written screenplays. Can you just talk a little bit about your process and how you approach, either writing a screenplay from scratch or accessing IP?
Yeah, I mean, usually personally, I like to adapt for whatever reason I think because as a writer, and I'm trying to overcome this, even though I'm not a spring chicken obviously anymore, but I'm still trying to work on my writing, believe it or not. It's always a process. You always have to try to improve. And that actually becomes a key element in writing. I think you always have to be able to listen to feedback and be able to improve your writing, no matter what stage you're at, because every single situation is different. And if you're working with customers, they're all different, and all the clients and all the producers are different. Okay, so in terms of the process that I go through is I find something that I am passionate about. I love what the message says. If I'm looking to work with an existing source material like a novel or a play or a news story or whatever, I like what the messaging is. And then I'll take it and work with it in terms of developing story beats and plot points and a treatment. And then from the treatment, I'll develop the script. So I have, frankly, in the past, have not been as disciplined as I just described. So I'm not going to say that I'm perfect. But I would say more and more as I gain, particularly when you're working with a customer or a client or a producer, and they have expectations, you need to have some kind of vehicle to have a communication with them. And the treatment is really the way to do that. So you can get on the same page in terms of, well, what is it that we're going to execute here in the screenplay? So even then, within situation with a customer or client or a producer, whatever, you know, you don't want to take anything. You want to be able to, you have to, again, I think, be able to live with whatever it is you're going to do. So if you don't like what they're trying to, you know, do what they want you to do, obviously you're not going to take the gig. Unfortunately, I've been really fortunate. I tried to set up a branding for nextPix and for myself that sort of does a self-vetting. so people don't come to me. I mean, I've had a couple of people, one or two people come to me with humanistic horror films, but for the most part, you know, people don't come to me with that kind of material. They come to me with material that they know that they feel that I would resonate with. And the same thing with the writing assignment as well. There's just a, you know, you just have a sense of what somebody will do or won't do.
So, oh, go on, sorry.
No, that's basically it. I mean, I go through a process of, to me, again, it's more disciplined now than it used to be. I like to adapt. That said, if it's an original idea, it, you know, to come up with a structure, a 3-act structure can often for me be the greatest challenge. And I think that the 3-act structure to this day is the one that works most effectively. You know, we like to think, I like to experiment with structure. You know, I'm not saying I'm a prude about it, but I think that the 3-act structure for the most part is effective and still works. You just have rising action, some kind of climactic scene or scenes, and then, you know, falling action and denouement of some kind. I mean, that really works. It's been proven over time. So structurally speaking, I still like to do things in acts, you know, and certainly as a playwright, that's the way you're taught. I mean, you know, that's the way you're trained to write. So, yeah.
And there was one thing that you mentioned. So like on your website, you have, you've kind of branded yourself to be more world cinema and, you know, to kind of, as you said, self kind of qualify people who come to you. As, again, a lot of people here are kind of newer, would you take like cold contact, you know what I mean? Like cold outreach on projects, etc. Or do you kind of shy away from that if someone reaches out to you via your website and say you don't know who they are, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I would put myself in the category of a producer that's more accessible, and they exist for sure. So you don't need to come to me with representation.
Got it. And
yeah,
with regards to most producers, though, would you say it's worth giving it a go, or do you think it's worth finding representation first? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it worth just going for it, and finding out later, or is it kind of worth seeing if you can get an agent first?
Well, you can try, because if they don't reply, which is the usual MO, there's this radio silence, right? If you get a rep, go back to them with a rep. So it's just, if they say no, then you've got the answer, which is a lot of the game that I've noticed is that people just don't reply sometimes, you know. So then it's the ambiguity of, well, how am I supposed to interpret that? Does that mean they're interested, not interested? Come on, people. But, you know, then you go to them with a rep, and sometimes a good rep will be able to get a response. That's the nice thing about a rep. It could be a lawyer, a legal. You know, I work with a legal team, a lawyer, which isn't, they aren't a lawyer in the sense of, well, we're, you know, out to do something. They're just, here we are, we're repping Don, and that's it. And they're an entertainment law firm.
And, you know, very often you hear how important networking is when you're starting out. How did you first start broadening out your network, and how would you maybe suggest people do it today?
Yeah, I don't have to worry about that so much anymore, because people do just, they know enough, they come to you. That took a while though. So basically initially it was film markets, film festivals and film markets. I mean, parties, film markets, meeting people, working with a producer that knew people. You know, sometimes if you can get a mentor, or working with a producer that knows people, that will help to network with other people that you know, that can be an effective way as well.
Got it. I definitely think a lot of people try and strive for that mentor, and you hear a lot of different takes on that. So Mark Duplass from the South by Southwest Festival did a really interesting talk around how, you know, just kind of build up your own content, and, you know, you keep getting better and better from there. For like a, you know, first time producer, what kind of advice would you give as like some tips as such before, and this would probably be some of the last questions before we go to the Q&A, just as a.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that most people on this call probably have started thinking about some of this, but I'll go ahead and say it. And of course, short films is one way to start developing your portfolio. And short films involve most of the processes of longer films, with a few exceptions. But to develop a portfolio of short films, if you're a writer, of course, you need to write, and you need to keep cranking out the screenplays and keep working on them, submitting them to festivals, submitting them for coverage. You can get an outfit like We Screenplay or the Blacklist to cover your screenplay. If they score it well, you can get attention. And you can get attention through the coverage agency or house themselves. If not, if you don't get enough attention to actually have them promote it, then if it's good enough, if you get a consider, for example, because coverage with We Screenplay, for example, is a pass, a consider, or a recommend. A recommend, of course, being the best, but a consider is not bad. So a consider is the upper tier. Let's say the upper 10% maybe would be considers, and 90% of scripts are pass. So if you get beyond a consider, you're doing not too shabby. And usually in your coverage for a consider, you can take a quote or two from the coverage and put it in a pitch deck, along with, here's some A-list actors, or here's some people that I think might be good in my project. And you can use that in your pitch deck to show to people. So that's one tip. Some people, I haven't seen, it's funny. I don't know if a lot of people do this with coverage, if they take quotes from coverage. I haven't seen a lot of people do it. Maybe they're out there talking about Don, saying, oh, there's the guy that uses coverage in his pitch deck. I don't know, but nobody's complained, let's put it that way. But it's like, when I learned that in theater, because when you're doing advertising for any play or for anything, and you do an advertisement in a newspaper, well, you pull a quote, right? And you put it on your advertisement. And that's exactly the idea with pulling a quote from coverage and putting it in your pitch deck. So you just want to make everything as enticing as you can to whoever you're showing your pitch to. And that's going to be all. And again, this is on the YouTube, by the way. This, we get into this in terms of developing a pitch that's enticing, and a pitch deck that's enticing. You want to just, you want people to take the next step, and always be thinking about what is it that's going to be making people want to take the next step with my project, until finally you're funded and greenlit and you're on the set, and that's it. And then there's distribution after that, of course.
I think this has been literally fantastic in terms of actionable advice, and very practical advice as well, in terms of how the whole market operates, from funding to distribution. I know that we haven't had that much discussion around principal photography and maybe like a bit more of the kind of pre-production side of things. And what I would do now is hand over to Trevor to kind of start the Q&A. And if anybody does have any questions around, what it's like on set, this is your chance to kind of pop that in the chat. But Don, I've personally learned a lot from this, and thank you for your time.
Sure.
Cool. All right. So yeah, I'm going to be taking over the Q&A portion of the talk. We have about 20 minutes or so for people to ask questions. So you can either type your questions in the chat and we'll get to them, or you could ask the question out loud by raising your hand on Zoom. We're going to get started with two questions that people had already asked. So this question was from Jelani. She says, in the role of a producer, what is the most important part of filmmaking that you focus on? I know storytelling, cinematography, acting, and many other roles are parts of filmmaking, but I wasn't sure if producers have an influence over those aspects. Or perhaps, do producers have an influence over those aspects of the production?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, in my perspective, once you're on set, it's a director's, project. You need to defer to the director. That's why you work to hire a good director. You don't want to get in their way. So an intelligent producer will not get in the director's way. But if the producer is the producer writer, well, that might be a little bit of a different equation, because there is a producer writer and they're interested in seeing their vision of their screenplay executed by the director. That might be a little bit different situation. But generally speaking, the most important part for a producer, it's all important. I mean, it really, I don't mean to be flippant about it, but I think that certainly fundraising is key, because in our world, money makes the things happen. So you need the funding to take the next step. But I would say that things are getting so cheap that it's possible to be creative and do a very, very relatively good film on with a really small, but it's insidiously low. And it's almost, there's almost people get frightened by how low you can make a film, the how low of a budget you can have. But frankly, it allows for creativity to happen. It allows for people to get into the business and to elevate themselves. So that's all a good thing. So what is the most important thing a producer does is, I think, is to create a tone and a vision and a sense of enthusiasm for the project that will keep it going from front to back. You have to maintain that level of energy and enthusiasm from front to back. You can't let it down. That's the main thing that a producer does. It's not the technical aspect, because you can always hire people to do the technical stuff. You have to know enough about the technical to not make an idiot of yourself, but at the same time, it's really not the most important thing. The passion and the energy to keep it going is really the most important thing. And figure out what is it that makes you and keeps you getting up in the morning and want to do it. And that, I think, is the most important thing.
Cool. Thank you very much. What would you do if you're a new film producer and you're going to your first film market / film festival with your film or your project?
So usually there's some kind of an online dashboard that they'll set you up with that you can request meetings through. So you can research some of the companies. They have a list of the companies that are going to be attending. You can make a list of the companies that you think would be beneficial to network with, and that you'd like to talk to for whatever reason, whether it's to pitch your script or you have a completed film or whatever. Make a list of those people and just start reaching out to them. Sometimes, some film festivals, particularly the bigger ones, can have a little bit of a pecking order, you might say. So more experienced producers, people that have been there before, people that know the market, they will be the ones that have the cachet, and you just have to kind of put up with it until you can get what you want out of it, which is really to meet with the right people. And a lot of people are much more accessible than you would think. You can just reach out to them, and there might be somebody at a very large company, but at a tier that they're more accessible, and you can reach out to them and get some kind of conversation or meeting going with them. So that's what I've done. Is most of the film markets are excellent now at having some kind of an online platform where you can begin the process of doing your networking.
Good. And this is along similar lines. If you have a film that is going to festivals, when would be a good time to start thinking about distribution for it?
That's a really interesting question, because I've seen, you don't want to be too quick. So, you can jump the gun with distribution, and maybe you should hold out for a better deal, But the art of it is really having a sense of, well, is my project is it good enough? Does it have the legs to get a better distribution deal than what's maybe in front of me right now? So, I wouldn't be in an incredible hurry and sign the first thing that comes by. But, you just want to sort of gauge it and use your common sense. And what is it that you need? And what is it that you think you can get out of it? And don't be too arrogant about it, because the arrogance could really shoot you in the foot. You want to have a combination of practicality, humility, but also a realistic assessment of how good your project is. And hopefully you know that, because people have been giving you the feedback.
Very cool. Let's see. All right. Does your film need to be funded before submitting to a film festival for distribution? What if you and your team make a decent film, but with your own funding? And that was from, I think you would say Tamibier. Not sure. Sorry if I butchered that, but the question was, does your film need to be funded before submitting it to a festival for distribution? What if you and your team made a decent film, but without funding?
Well, if I understand the question correctly, you have to be funded to make the film. So if you don't have a film, then you can't go to a festival. I mean, I'm not trying to be.
Right. I think they're asking, could like a really low budget film, or one that you feel, self-funded, could that be distributed theoretically?
Yes.
Right.
I mean, the classic is Blair Witch Project.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of the classic one. It usually doesn't happen. It's rare.
Right.
But, what I'm trying to stress is that it really is, the creativity is so key. Whether it's a screenplay or the film or whatever, just make sure that your project it reflects your creative vision in a really interesting way. And that's all editing and camera angles and acting and all the human stuff. So that's the great news. That's just talent. So, and I think the people on this call are, probably got some. So.
Yes, of course. What has been the effect of streaming services on the indie film space? And that's a question from Brian.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't say that I've got the definitive answer on that one. Mm-hmm. But I know that let's say with Ned Rifle, for example, the Netflix did some aspect of the distribution, but they didn't take it over. Mm-hmm. There was still a theatrical, there was still a territory release, there's still, aspects of it that are not under Netflix's umbrella. So my take on the disruption is that they can disrupt the traditional territory model that sales agents are used to. It is a possibility that can happen. It doesn't have to happen, but it can happen. Mm-hmm. And then moreover, from what I understand, there's distribution platforms where you can, in a sense, cut out the sales agent and go directly to distributors yourself. So that hasn't, because it's such a relationship-based business, that it hasn't really had that much impact. And festivals and markets and rubbing shoulders and talking to people and networking, that's really still the way it happens. I don't ever think it'll be a completely all online thing. And I don't think that Netflix will completely take over. If anything, there's competing streamers now that are coming out, like Paramount, I think, recently launched their streaming service. So there's competition. The problem in theory with streamers is you get some kind of monopolistic thing going on, but now we see that that's not going to happen. As long as there's a competitive mix, it should be okay. It should be okay. I would think. Right,
of course. As a producer, do you have any advice for people who want to pitch their own projects to potential investors? And I really like this question because you have a talk about it on YouTube, which maybe gives more information, but perhaps we could just go into it a little bit here.
Sure. I mean, you have to distinguish between what I would call a pitch deck and a business plan. So when you're going to investors, you really need a business plan. And a business plan is like a pitch deck, but it's more than a pitch deck. It might contain elements of the pitch deck, but it has more. It might have a distribution strategy associated with it. It might have a detailed, some kind of a quasi forecast, sales forecast that's realistic. It will have a waterfall diagram showing the return on investment, how that falls out in a waterfall down from the initial investment down to, well, what do I see if the film breaks even and goes into profit? Well, what percentage of am I going to see on my side? That should be in the business plan as well. So waterfall, distribution strategy, perhaps some level of forecasting that's realistic, that type of thing that's outside of the sales agent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, if people want to learn more information about that, I just linked the talk on the chat right here. And also, I know in a couple of your other talks, actually, you talk a little bit, touch a little bit on these things as well in terms of what you need for a pitch and how to ultimately get funding for your film.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the important thing is if you're going for investors, the pitch deck is one piece, but really you need a business plan. And if you're going to studios or major production houses, a pitch deck could be enough because you're really selling the script, the project, the vision.
Right.
You're not selling it as an investment per se,
Mm-hmm.
even though it is really, you're looking to them to invest, but it isn't the same thing. If you know, it's a different equation. It's not quite apples to apples. So you want to, I mean, this has been my experience, at least, is I can go through my rep, I can go to whoever, just a high level person, but you aren't going to give them a waterfall diagram. That's not going to be what you need to show them. But if you're showing an investor from Des Moines, Iowa, who has no friggin' idea about the movie business, you better educate them, or you can have issues. I mean, you want to have an educated investor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And something that's actually quite interesting that I've seen, or that you told me about, was that you can send your film or project to be kind of like analyzed for its potential, and then use that as a sales tool. And that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the caveat there is you want to be careful, because if somebody calls you on it and say, "Oh, that sounds interesting coverage," let me see the coverage. And if it was a pass and you happen to pick up an out of context quote on a pass, so that's not a good thing. So you should probably at least have a consider in your coverage to pull a quote, just to be careful about it. You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot.
Right.
Yeah,
definitely.
But they will help you. They can help you, some of them.
Definitely. I just wanted to see if anyone had any more questions. We have a couple minutes left. So if anyone has any last minute questions, please put them in the chat right now. I'm just going to check on LinkedIn to see if we got any other questions. Right. Any other questions? I'll give you maybe like 10 more seconds or so, and then we can start talking about the contest. Well, let's talk about the contest real quick. And if anyone has any other last minute questions, they can put them in the chat. So like I said, I've been interning for Don for the past about 6 months. And one of the initiatives that I've been trying to do is to increase YouTube subscribers, Facebook, social media subscribers. And so we came up with an idea to do a contest where you can win a 1-hour chat with Don. I believe, you can talk about advice on projects, career, Q&A questions you can ask him. I believe Don's basically open to talking about practically anything. Your views on films, what films you like, I don't know. Yeah, we're doing a contest, and all you have to do is submit this form. Let me know if that works for you. Put down your name, your email, and then please subscribe to each of his social media channels. And then click the box, and we will be drawing a person randomly to get the talk, and we're going to draw that on Friday. I will let you know which or whoever wins. I will email you and coordinate a time so you guys can both talk and meet up. So yeah, anything else to add, Don? I know we got a Q&A question right here.
Okay.
But says we have nothing to do with filmmaking, but what do you prefer, dogs or cats?
Do you prefer dogs or cats? Oh, I like both dogs and cats.
Yeah, so anything else to add? Anything else you want to talk about? Or I guess maybe we could end it by you maybe saying like, is there any advice that you would give, young producers or young filmmakers in this group?
Yeah, I mean, I think that basically it's just, again, to do what will inspire you to get up the next day and want to continue. And I know that sounds kind of high level, but it really is the, what is it that motivates you to want to do this stuff? It's not always very easy to do. It takes a lot of perseverance a lot of times. It took me a long time, because I just wouldn't let go of me. Whatever my mother instilled in me in that movie theater when I was a teenager, I have to blame her, I guess. But it just wouldn't let go. I just have to try to see what I can do. Because I feel like if you don't do that, if you know you have talent, if you know you have some talent, if you don't allow yourself to express it, you're really doing yourself a disservice. So if you feel you have talent, just don't give up on yourself. Just keep at it and keep persevering. And a lot of people will say, no, no, no. Just say, yes, yes. I'm going to keep going, and have the perseverance and determination to continue. Believe in yourself. If you assess yourself that you don't have maybe as much talent as you thought, maybe you can find a skill that you can develop the talent in, or you can get better. You can always get better. I mean, even there's no naturals per se. I mean, everybody learns and gets better. So that would be my advice. Persevere is a big one. Don't give up.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. I did want to say, I see there's some more questions, but I think we're out of time. And I'd like to say, if you have any more questions for Don, you can always, obviously submit to the contest, because there's a decent chance that you might win a talk with him. And another option is, would they be able to email you
Yes.
any of their questions? Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
people can email me. That's fine.
Well, would you be able to type your email in the chat?
Sure. If I don't get back immediately, don't take offense. I will get back to you eventually. It might take me a week or so, but I will get back to you.
Perfect. Nice. Yeah, thank you so much, Don, for coming and speaking with us. This has been very educational and inspirational session. So I really appreciate you coming and educating us all. So everyone, say thank you to Don. Feel free to unmute yourselves or type in the chat. Thank you very much, Don.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure. It was really fun.